Speaker. And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, that Nova Scotians who need insulin pumps and the ancillary supplies would like to know if they're covered. And Mr. Speaker, I urge the government to set aside the politics of division, particularly with something as important as health care, and join us. The NDP goals are not about reinventing the wheel. We are proposing simple, effective steps that this government can take to improve wait times in Nova Scotia. Not on a piecemeal basis, not just at the Nova Scotia at the throne speech times, but in a focused, coherent manner. Mr. Speaker, before I continue, I know that my colleague would like to make an introduction. I would be happy to cede the floor to him at this point in order to do that.
The Honourable, the member for Waverley, Fall River, Bedford, Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to also thank the honourable member and leader of the opposition, the leader of the official opposition, for allowing me to make this introduction. I'd like to take just a brief moment up in the West Gallery to introduce to you from the beautiful school of Beaverbank Kinsack Elementary, the grade 5 and grade 6 students. And I'd like to just read Mrs. McGilvery's class and Miss Baker, their grade 6 students, Mr. Deal with his grade 5 and grade 6 students. And also I would like to take another brief moment to acknowledge some of the parents that are here. And we have Maureen Baker, Laura Conrad, Jen Morehouse, Chuck McAvoy, Chris Lloyd, Jim McCachran, and Leah Fisher. And I'm just wondering if the House will, if the students would rise and get a warm greeting from the House this morning.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Wait times. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, we're not about reinventing the wheel. What we're trying to present are simple and effective steps that this government can take. For example, Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia was a pioneer in educating nurse practitioners, yet we have fallen behind in training and hiring these crucial healthcare workers. More nurse practitioners will allow for the creation of collaborative health teams without waiting as long as 5 years for better access to family doctors. We have proposed a provincial rehab program to help deal with surgery wait times. Multidisciplinary prehab teams can assess and prepare patients for surgery. Since 2003, and again in this campaign, we have proposed a central surgical list. This would allow streamlining surgical appointments and giving patients the first available date. And ironically, Mr. Speaker, after years of the provincial failure in this regard, Dalhousie doctors and the QE2 are taking matters into their own hands and moving to establish a central wait list. Good for them, and I hope the government will now follow them. By directly funding collaborative multidisciplinary practices that team doctors and nurse practitioners with other healthcare professionals, Nova Scotia can ease the direct workloads on doctors by almost 30%, Mr. Speaker, and these collaborative clinics work, and they work in Nova Scotia. We don't have to look any further than Middleton, where a new collaborative clinic has cut wait times in half. The throne speech promised just one more such practice in a community where the need was identified years ago. And that, Mr. Speaker, is just not good enough. Mr. Speaker, there should be no excuses. Nova Scotians deserve quicker access to health care in this province. Mr. Speaker, despite our aging population, the current government reduced the number of long-term care beds between 1999 and 2006, despite being elected on a promise to lift the previous freeze on new long-term care beds. Compared to the rest of Canada, we have a deficit of over 500 beds for a population aged 75 or older who need them. This has created a major problem for our hospitals as the minister would know. At least 300 beds needed for surgery and acute care have been blocked, and the opportunity that waits is for Nova Scotia to do more than just clear up the backlog. We should be rapidly opening opportunities for self-managed care, for improved seniors housing that promotes independent living, and for caregiver support, because it is those two-income families that are usually called upon when a patient or other close relative suddenly has urgent health care requirements. Our home care system must get better and better at preventing these kinds of a health crisis which can put otherwise healthy people in a nursing home. The solution should be flexible and community-based rather than central institutional perspectives. Mr. Speaker, my opinion is that in Nova Scotia, at least, local community, friends and family often come up with the best solution if governments facilitate rather than entangle them. If we plan well the jobs that are needed to sustain communities and local services, to keep this an attractive province for businesses and young families, will come partly from the enhanced services at home and the improved seniors housing options, which are the most cost-effective way to serve the 25% of Nova Scotians who will be 65 or more. Now, Mr. Speaker, just briefly, I'd like to turn to palliative care. Care and compassion are central to who we are as Nova Scotians. We count on each other as we journey through life's many transitions. We hope to enjoy our lives with those who we love. We hope that these same people will be with us when we die. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, it is not often possible. More than 80% of Canadians say that they want to die at home in familiar surroundings with the people they love. Yet most of us die in hospitals. Family and friends often find that it is difficult to gain palliative care services for a loved one to spend their last days at home or in a similar family-centered setting in a hospital. The Nova Scotia Hospice Palliative Care Association describes it best. Palliative care matters because everyone deserves a good death. Earlier this year, and again during this session of the legislature, my colleague, the member for Sackville-Cobequid, who is the NDP health critic, is introducing legislation that would see the development and implementation of a palliative care strategy across the province. A key component to the NDP proposal is consultation with the district health authorities, healthcare workers, the Nova Scotia Hospice Palliative Care Association, as well as other stakeholders. This is an important piece of legislation because Nova Scotia has shining examples of palliative care, but it is not consistently available across the province. In the meantime, many people in this province are suffering physically and emotionally and spiritually, living with a terminal illness, and we are not providing them with the support services that they need. Mr. Speaker, in Southwest Health, they have developed their own response, a symptom kit to provide prescription drugs required to deal with end-of-life care, a stopgap response to try and deal with the lack of a provincial strategy. We need a provincial palliative care strategy so that people can die at home if they choose, no matter where they live in Nova Scotia. A well-thought-out palliative care strategy could provide a single point of access so that families are not left on their own to locate the needed care. The Nova Scotia Hospice Palliative Care Association has never given up on its effort to gain a palliative care strategy for Nova Scotia. They need to know, and Nova Scotians need to know, that the NDP is fully committed to doing all we can to make sure that this strategy, which is so important to all of us, becomes a reality. Mr. Speaker, community safety. Strong leadership means finding ways to achieve, ensuring that things get better. Therefore, it is not good enough for the Premier to defend the issue of community crime or to deflect the issue of community crime and youth crime to the federal level. It's not good enough because there is much that can be done on the provincial level. There are steps that they can take as Premier immediately to reduce community and youth crime. For example, Mr. Speaker, I have introduced legislation that will help protect the public from the dangers of illegal street racing. It's time to put the brakes on street racing. There's hardly a community in this province that has not been shocked by the increase in this activity over the summer. People are being hurt, Mr. Speaker. People are being killed. We have stiff penalties for most other dangerous driving activities. It's time that we pass laws that make the streets of our community safer. Mr. Speaker, I believe that we all believe that everyone has the right to walk the streets in safety, that seniors feel secure in their homes and our youth are safe at school, and those who offend and reoffend often do so because they don't fear the consequences. They have no respect for the institutions of society which are meant to guarantee security for you and I. To help improve community safety and eliminate youth crime, actions must have consequences, and those consequences must be handed down in a timely fashion. There is action that can be taken right now. Set up a special unit or task force for police and prosecutors to deal with people arrested and immediately released on conditions. This means more resources to monitor those who are likely to reoffend, faster trials for any new charges. High visibility by police forces can send a stronger message to those who are criminally minded. The province can work with municipalities so that the additional police officers are used to dramatically reduce petty crime. Impose selective curfews on youth who act in an antisocial manner, as well as providing the resources to make those curfews meaningful. This province has a legislative framework to provide family resources and protective services for antisocial children and youth. And Mr. Speaker, open our schools after hours, on holidays and weekends, at no cost to the participants. Don't keep promising it, actually do it. It's time to give Nova Scotia's youth alternatives to wandering the streets. There is a role for provincial responsibility, and follow-through can make it happen. Mr. Speaker, I want to address one last piece, Mr. Speaker, in the couple of minutes that I have. Mr. Speaker, in 2005, John Hamm assembled the vast weight of opinion of this province and gained the support of all parties and members of Parliament for a simple proposition, that regardless of what equalization formula or tax system may be from time to time, the federal government would return its direct and indirect revenue from its offshore to this province during the years when we have our first major successes from it. That view, the offshore revenue agreement, commonly described as the Atlantic Accord, was unanimously endorsed by the Nova Scotia legislature this spring. The support that Dr. Hamm assembled for that view may actually be stronger here today than it was at the time. This will be a litmus test for the credibility of those who have endorsed the 2005 Accord. I know that the members of Parliament will be giving this legislation careful attention. The Nova Scotia NDP decided in 2001 and 2002 that they would take a constructive approach to the debate of provincial issues, and that remains our role in fostering good public policy. That constructive approach has turned out to be ideal for a period of minority government because we had a positive agenda and wide public support. The Nova Scotia NDP has not cooperated simply for the sake of cooperation. Instead, we frame our efforts around the goal of a better deal for today's families. As the political situation keeps unfolding, as key elements of that better deal are enacted, we develop and present new ways to achieve the better deal. We learn more about the challenges that confront a government of many stripes that wish to make the most of Nova Scotia's economic opportunities. Mr. Speaker, that is how our caucus and party will proceed, Mr. Speaker, in the session and in the months ahead, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
The Honourable, the Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am honoured to rise today as the new leader of the Nova Scotia Liberal Party to deliver a Liberal response to the speech from the throne. On behalf of our caucus and on behalf of those who believe in a richer, fairer, more compassionate Nova Scotia. I'd like to thank the new Lieutenant Governor, May-Ann Francis, and acknowledge the work she had done with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission and the good work that she has been doing since becoming our new Lieutenant Governor. I also want to congratulate you, Mr. Speaker, being chosen Speaker of the House. It's wonderful to see a man with a beard sitting in the Speaker's chair. If I have my way, Mr. Speaker, beards will be taking over in this place soon, so don't worry about it. To those who work on the floor, to those who work on the floor of the legislature and behind the scenes, thank you for supporting the job that we do as MLAs. It is not the tradition in this province for government to prorogue the legislature and deliver a throne speech midway through their mandate. Nor is it tradition for their elected representatives to be out of the House for 7 months. I would like to recognize the Premier for calling MLAs back to the House, and I would also like to acknowledge him for not making his throne speech a confidence motion, but for demonstrating his will to make this minority government work. The Liberal caucus is committed to working with the Conservatives and the NDP and all members of this House to provide good government, fair government, and balanced government, and I am proud to take part in that debate. I welcome the opportunity to respond to the Premier's agenda and lay out a Liberal approach to those issues that matter most to Nova Scotians and their families. Liberalism has long been synonymous with economic progress and social change, and I see our party as a tool of advancing the values of courage, responsibility, compassion, and integrity. These are Liberal values, and they are Nova Scotian values. They are values that will guide my response today and shape my party's vision for Nova Scotia. After this minority government was elected, they promised the people of Nova Scotia that they would seek common-sense solutions to the challenges we face. Well, I'm here to express my profound disappointment in the government's record. In June 2006, the Conservatives mapped out a path for this province and promised Nova Scotians that they would address their priorities. Yesterday's speech did not wipe clean the record of this government's mismanagement, nor does it change the fact that they have let Nova Scotians down. And here we are again. Just over a year later, Nova Scotians are looking for leadership, and they are looking for a roadmap that will take our province into the future. This minority government promised to provide common-sense solutions. Nova Scotians are reasonable people, but there is nothing reasonable about taking away healthcare workers' right to strike. Our ailing healthcare system will not be fixed by picking a fight with the province's valued healthcare professionals. The Premier and his ministers are trying to distract Nova Scotians from the real issues. Any strike legislation will not bring more doctors or nurses to this province. It will not address the unacceptable wait times, and it will not keep our emergency rooms open. Early in September, I announced that the Liberal caucus will not support legislation that takes away workers' right to strike. We were the first opposition party to publicly declare our position, and we will keep our word to Nova Scotians. This was not a decision that came lightly. We met with union representatives, we met with doctors and nurses, we met with some of the very same people who filled the streets in protest yesterday. We reached out to Nova Scotians because Liberals are consensus builders, and we are committed to providing a balanced policy position that are in the best interest of Nova Scotians. Our healthcare workers want to be on the job, not on the picket line, and they are committed to providing the best quality healthcare to Nova Scotians. Essential service legislation has not worked in other jurisdictions across Canada. It has not prevented illegal strikes, and the collective bargaining process is working in Nova Scotia. Our system has not been plagued by strikes or work stoppages. It has been suffering from government's indifference, and the indifference has led to a crisis in our health care. Mr. Speaker, that is the real issue. This year alone, the province's emergency rooms have been closed for over 5,700 hours. Imagine for a moment, your sick child requires immediate medical assistance. You drive to the hospital, and there's a closed sign on the door. That is the reality for too many Nova Scotians in too many communities across this province, and this is unacceptable. Healthcare professionals are stretched to their limits. The Liberal caucus has offered practical solutions to alleviate pressures on emergency room workers, but the government has chosen to ignore our practical, common sense solutions. This summer, the member from Digby-Annapolis took matters into his own hands. He approached the Pines Resort and asked them to provide accommodations for traveling doctors that will cover ER shifts at the Digby General. And the resort recognized the value of this suggestion and agreed to take in the doctors free of charge. Now, if that's not a common sense solution, I don't know what is. Our Liberal caucus has called on the government to create a centralized service for health authorities within the Department of Health to match ER doctors with hospitals in need. We suggested that the province hire a force of locum physicians to fill the need on a temporary basis, but government has refused, despite community support for this initiative and the willingness of doctors to try this option. The government speaks of their efforts to recruit nurses and doctors while they wage an open battle with healthcare professionals over anti-strike legislation. This doesn't make sense. The issues plaguing our healthcare system are some of the same issues that Nova Scotians were talking about on the doorsteps during my first campaign in 1999. The Conservatives had 8 long years to strengthen the system. The current government has had over a year to present Nova Scotians with a plan for healthcare, and they haven't. Nova Scotians are still waiting for this government's plan to address spiraling tuition rates and declining enrollment in Nova Scotia universities. Federal funding for educational infrastructure will dry up at the end of 07-08. Where is the plan to take us beyond the end of that year? Our Liberal education critic, the member from Kings West, has been calling on the government to tell us how they intend to meet their stated commitment of reducing tuition fees to national average by 2010. Frankly, $500 in tuition relief for Nova Scotia students only goes so far, when the average undergraduate tuition fees in this province is $5,878. With the highest tuition fees in the entire country, a university education remains out of reach for many. Right now, students are funding the operational costs at most of the province's universities at a higher rate than government. Students shouldn't be paying the price for government's neglect of the system, but they are. High tuitions, low government funding is resulting in Nova Scotia students leaving our province to pursue their post-secondary education elsewhere. We should be doing everything we can to encourage our young people to learn and work in Nova Scotia. This session, our caucus will be asking the government to prove to Nova Scotians that they have a plan to make post-secondary education more accessible for those students who have the grades and wish to study here in Nova Scotia. The Conservative government has committed to helping students learn better. Let's work together to make this a reality. A quality public education system is the foundation for a more competitive and prosperous Nova Scotia. We need to get back to the basics and address our province's failing grades in math and literacy. We need to look at reducing class sizes to acceptable levels beyond 3rd grade. Large class sizes put an added strain on our educators and make it more difficult for students to receive the one-on-one attention they deserve. Nova Scotia students should be provided with a full range of assessments in the primary year of schooling so that learning disabilities can be determined early on and appropriate measures can be implemented. Each and every Nova Scotian student deserves to be provided with the learning environment that meets his or her needs. That's why we Liberals want the government to expand tuition support for special needs students attending the province's private special education schools. We believe in a strong public education system, but the reality is that system is failing those who need our help the most. Tuition support should be available for eligible students for an unlimited period of time until it is determined that their needs can be met in the public education system. And when it comes to a pre-primary education, the province has to do better. Nova Scotia doesn't have a strong early childhood education program. If the government is not going to expand the 2005 pilot program, it should be looking at other options to strengthen pre-primary education in this province. The Conservative government promised Nova Scotians that it would support those most in need. Today, over 11,500 children of working parents live in poverty in Nova Scotia. And let me repeat that. That is of working parents. I applaud the Premier for recognizing that we have not done enough to help the most vulnerable in our province. Poverty is not a matter of charity. Poverty is a human rights issue. I believe that this government has an obligation to ensure that the opportunities are distributed equally in this province and that no one is left behind. Last fall, I introduced a bill in the legislature calling on government to strike a committee to develop a comprehensive poverty reduction strategy for Nova Scotia. Initially, this government reduced the issue of poverty to a community service problem. Clearly, poverty is not just a community service issue. That is why our legislation called for representation from departments such as the status of women, community service, health promotion, justice, finance, education, Aboriginal affairs. We stress that this committee should not work in isolation from community stakeholders, but in collaboration with anti-poverty groups, women's groups, academics, mental health organizations, and other relevant stakeholders. Our province's anti-poverty groups have the knowledge, skill, and experience that the committee will need to do this job effectively. They are on the front lines of this issue. They are working with Nova Scotia's poor every day. A couple of days of consultation isn't going to cut it. We need to create a process that formally engages our experts and gives them a voice in determining the direction this strategy takes. During our last spring sitting, I presented a resolution calling on government to create this poverty reduction strategy committee as soon as possible. That resolution received unanimous approval from the members of this legislature. That is why I will reintroduce my bill and encourage the government to follow through on its commitment of the basic structure we suggested: multi-departmental and community representative. Let's move forward with the goal of building a province that provides everyone with the opportunity to create a better life for themselves and their family. A poverty reduction strategy is an important step towards eliminating poverty, but we can do more and we must do more. We have called on the government to strengthen programs like Career Seeks to help provide individuals with realistic opportunities to upgrade their education so that they can get off social assistance permanently. We have called on government to strengthen the Harvest Connection program and allow Nova Scotians on assistance the opportunity to gain valuable work experience without having their benefits reduced. Work programs need to be practical and they need to be extended to more industries in more parts of the province. We have asked the government to expand the mandate of programs provided by Nova Scotia Legal Aid. The advocacy work currently undertaken by Dalhousie Legal Aid is not provided by other organizations outside of Metro. The province needs to increase the programs and services it provides through Nova Scotia Legal Aid so advocacy programs can be provided right across this province. Liberals have called on the government to end the moratorium on the creation of small option homes. Affordable housing is simply not available in many areas of this province, and the problem is getting worse. Rents are steadily increasing, and there are too many vacancies in community service housing units. The moratorium on small options homes in this province has created a crisis situation among low-income, disabled persons trying to gain their independence. Liberals have asked the government to permit those on social assistance to earn up to $3,000 before any money is clawed back. Liberals have also called on the government to reintroduce Keep the Heat program to provide financial assistance for low-income individuals. The cost of heating oil is up 16 cents per litre from this time last year. The Salvation Army says it is getting more than a dozen calls a day from people who can't afford to keep their homes warm, and the cold season hasn't even hit here yet. No Nova Scotian should be cold. We will again be calling on government to re-establish the much-needed program. These recommendations will not put an end to poverty, but they are few practical ways to address a situation that is making life unbearable for many Nova Scotians. Numerous studies and reports have determined that poverty is a major factor in youth violence. Poverty forces people into desperate situations. Some of our province's youth commit crimes to survive, not because it's the path they have chosen. Liberals know that one of the best ways to reduce crime is to prevent it from occurring in the first place. Until the government gets serious about poverty, homelessness, mental health issues, substance abuse, unemployment, our crime rate will continue to cause alarm for Nova Scotians. It's time for the Premier and his government to invest in our youth, providing our communities with first-class recreational facilities is one way to do this. Our province needs to do better at providing educational and after-school programs. The government needs to provide resources that engage youth and give them a meaningful role in our communities. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have committed to making our streets, neighbourhoods, communities safer. But the reality is people are scared, and they are looking for government to take a leadership role on this issue. While overall crime rates are decreasing, incidents of sexual assault and violent assaults in Nova Scotia are among the highest in the country. Perhaps the most troubling statistic of those that indicate a 17% increase in youth crime in this year alone. Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate the former Justice Minister for taking action to address illegal drug activity in our communities through the creation of public safety investigative units. This is a common-sense solution that is making a real difference in the communities in Nova Scotia. The Premier and his new Justice Minister are correct when they say that the federal government needs to strengthen the Youth Criminal Justice Act. But they have to stop blaming our province's high crime rate on Ottawa. It's time to stop hiding behind a piece of legislation. The Liberal caucus has presented the Premier with some of our own ideas. The Premier could require convenience stores and gas stations to double staff during overnight shifts, but he has refused. The Premier should make good on his promise to hire all 250 police officers to have a greater police presence on our streets, but he hasn't. Liberals believe that we need to get tough on crime and balance stronger enforcement measures, stronger legislation, and a genuine commitment to target the root causes of crime. Nova Scotians are looking for leadership on crime. But they're also looking for answers on other issues. The Premier owes Nova Scotians an explanation for the failed business mentorship program for immigration. From its inception, this was a poor program. Nova Scotians are reasonable people, and there was nothing reasonable about this program. The province charged immigrants over $130,000 their own money to come to Nova Scotia and participate in this program. They gave $20,000 to a headhunter somewhere in the world who matched the immigrant with a business. And then they gave $10,000 to a company through an untendered contract to administer the program. To add insult to injury, the immigrant worker was paid a minimum of $20,000 of his or her own money. This program fell under the purview of several former cabinet ministers, including our very own Premier. Despite widespread concern with the program, these ministers and our Premier did nothing. This program has tarnished the reputation of Nova Scotia as a warm and welcoming province. It has tarnished Canada's reputation around the world, and we should all be embarrassed. Canada was built on a wise immigration policy. This province was built on a wise immigration policy. We have flourished because of immigration, and this Premier has turned our immigration policy from a source of pride into a source of disgrace. This is no way to welcome future Canadians, and I am calling on the Premier to refund those nominees who have completed the program and stayed in Nova Scotia. Refund them the difference between the $100,000 they paid to the mentoring business and the salary they received. This is the right thing to do. We need to provide opportunities to help newcomers settle comfortably in our communities and use the skills and expertise to contribute to the economy of this province. Immigration is just one aspect of a successful economic development strategy, and the Atlantic Accord was another. In 2005, Nova Scotia signed an agreement with the federal government that ensured 100% of the province's offshore revenue would be protected from equalization clawbacks. The Atlantic Accord was an economic development tool that guaranteed our provinces hundreds of millions of dollars in the long term. It was a formal agreement that allowed us to dream of a more prosperous Nova Scotia for our children. It allowed my children to dream about dreams that my generation cannot. Yesterday afternoon in Ottawa, my federal colleagues received their long-awaited briefing from federal finance officials. Not surprising, finance officials flatly refused to confirm that the benefits would flow to Nova Scotia under this new deal. They say our Premier's numbers are unreliable, speculative at best. A two-page Atlantic Accord has been transformed into a highly technical 24-page document. This makes Bill Casey nervous, and it should make all of us nervous as well. Despite what Peter MacKay has told Nova Scotians, we don't have a choice when it comes to the equalization. We are now permanently locked into the new O'Brien formula, which includes a cap on how much money the province will receive from its offshore revenue before equalization is clawed back. Furthermore, the federal government has refused to honor Clause 4 of the Accord, which allows the agreement to apply to the equalization formula of the day. This is not the Atlantic Accord that John Hamm and Paul Martin signed. The 2000 Atlantic Accord is not alive and well and better than ever. Mr. Speaker, the Atlantic Accord is dead. It's time for the Prime Minister to start treating this province with the respect we deserve, and it's time for our Premier to stand up for Nova Scotia and demand this respect. We have lost our long fight over the Atlantic Accord, but Stephen Harper has agreed to strike an arbitration panel to determine the issue of Crown share payments that were guaranteed to Nova Scotia in the 1986 offshore agreement. I recognize this panel's recommendations are not binding on the federal government, but I personally believe some money will arrive. And when it does, we must remember that this money has already been spent. It has been spent 4 times over in 4 different ways by John Buchanan. When that check arrives, I want the Premier to place that money directly on the debt where it belongs. Not only is it the fiscally responsible thing to do, it is the right thing to do. Nova Scotians are reasonable people, and they want their laws and regulations to be reasonable. And there is nothing reasonable about gas regulation. Nova Scotians are not going to use more gas because the price is fair. They are going to put that money to better use. And the proof is in. Gas regulation has been bad for Nova Scotia. A bad idea doesn't improve with time. It has cost each one of us, and it costs each and every time we fill our gas tank. But Liberals didn't just complain about a bad idea. We presented a constructive solution, one that is good for all Nova Scotians. Nova Scotians pay among the highest price for gasoline in the country. This session, we will introduce legislation to scrap regulation and reduce the motor fuel tax by 4 cents a litre. We will also be introduced legislation to establish a watchdog to protect consumers from unfair gas prices. This is about fairness. It is also about competitiveness. The Premier is allowing Nova Scotia businesses to suffer. Gas stations are closing, and they are literally watching their customers fill up in New Brunswick. And there's nothing reasonable about gas regulation. Yesterday, the Premier attempted to convince Nova Scotians that his government has a new vision for this province. He told us that the economy of our province is healthy and strong, but the record speaks for itself. Nova Scotia was the only province to experience a decline in growth of jobs last year. Nova Scotia is projected to experience the lowest export growth of any province or territory over the next year. In over a 5-year period, 2002 to 2006, Nova Scotia experienced the lowest growth of real GDP of any province. Simply put, Nova Scotia is not keeping pace with the rest of the country. In fact, we are lagging behind. This government has abandoned our primary industries, the very industries that built our economy: fishing, farming, and forestry. Yes, the economy of today is different than it was even 10 years ago, but we cannot forget about the economic backbone of rural Nova Scotia. Our hog farmers are in a state of crisis. They can't afford to sell their hogs, but they are still, because they'd be forced to take a loss, and they can't afford to leave the industry because their debts are so high. The province's fishing processing plants are closing and moving to other provinces. Our lumber mills are closing. And if the current rate of closures continue, they will be all gone in 10 years. And the industry has been asking for a forest management plan, but this government, year after year, fails to act. We understand that no government can be all things to all people, but the Conservatives have failed after 8 long years in power to seize on the great economic potential of this province and its people. Opportunity is knocking, and the development of the Atlantic Gateway will allow Nova Scotia to develop our transportation infrastructure and seize upon a full range of national and global opportunities. In October, our provincial government signed a memorandum of understanding with the federal government, the governments of New Brunswick, PEI, Newfoundland, and Labrador to collaborate on the development of a gateway strategy within 2 years. We're talking about developing a strategy within 2 years. This is unacceptable. We need to recognize our tremendous potential as a province and proudly take our place in the Federation. And we are still lagging behind, and 2 years is 2 years too long to wait. The Premier spoke about infrastructure improvements in the speech from the throne. There are communities in this province that won't have access to broadband internet by 2009. This is unacceptable. There are bridges in this province, some in my own riding, that are crumbling. This is unacceptable. Throughout Nova Scotia, there is an aging infrastructure that needs to be upgraded or replaced, not just pavement, but schools and hospitals. There are literally hundreds of Nova Scotia businesses who found the courage to innovate and enter the new age of the global competitiveness. They are helping to build a stronger Nova Scotia, and I say it's time for our government to follow suit. We need to be leaders and not followers. It's time to seize upon the tremendous geographical advantage and become leaders in renewable energy. It's time to take advantage of our tremendous system of universities and colleges and become the research and development capital in Canada when it comes to renewable energy. Let's open our arms to the world and seize the opportunities provided by a knowledge economy and global trading patterns. That's competitiveness. That's the winning attitude, and we must reclaim it if we are to proudly take our place in the world. The Liberal caucus will not abandon our proud tradition of optimism and determination. Mr. Speaker, our caucus has consistently offered practical, common-sense solutions to the issues that matter most to Nova Scotians, because that's what reasonable people do. In the coming weeks, we will be introducing legislation to create a fairer, greener, safer, more competitive, and more compassionate Nova Scotia, because that's what Liberals do. I look forward to a productive session. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Merci beaucoup, and I will adjourn debate until the wishes of the leader, the House Leader.
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the government's business for the day. I move that the House do now rise. And we meet again Monday at the hour of 7 p.m. and the House hours be from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Government business will continue with address and reply to speech from the throne. And if we get to the business of government bills, we'll be looking at calling Bill 12, the Evidence Act, and Bill 13, the Probate Act.
Are you ready for the question? All in favor? Against? Motion is carried.